Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal filling the small garage. The ancient fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor littered with spare parts and empty coffee cups. Another long day was ending at Riley's auto repair, and Marcus was looking forward to heading home to his small apartment and a hot meal. The bell above the front door chimed, announcing a late customer. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall, showing nearly 7 in the evening. Most people didn't bring their cars in this late, especially not on a Friday. He looked up from the engine he'd been working on and froze. Standing in the doorway was the largest being Marcus had ever seen. The creature had to duck to fit through the entrance, its massive frame covered in dark green scales that seemed to absorb the light. 2 enormous wings were folded tightly against its back, and amber eyes the size of dinner plates looked around the garage with obvious uncertainty. This was a dragon, one of the alien species that had joined humanity in the Great War against the Devourers 20 years ago. The dragon's movements were careful and deliberate, favoring its left leg significantly. Deep scars crisscrossed the visible parts of its body, and one wing appeared to have been badly damaged at some point, hanging at an odd angle. This was clearly a veteran, someone who had fought alongside human forces in battles that most people preferred not to think about anymore. "Excuse me," the dragon said, its voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "Are you still open? I know it's late, but I'm having trouble with my transport." Marcus noticed how the dragon's English was precise, but carried a slight accent, the way someone speaks when they've learned a language well, but it wasn't their first. More importantly, he noticed how the creature seemed to expect rejection. There was a resigned quality to the way it stood, as if it was already preparing to be turned away. "Sure, we're still open," Marcus replied, setting down his tools and walking over. "What kind of trouble are you having?" The dragon's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the welcoming response. "It's the hover conversion unit on my ground vehicle. It keeps failing, and I cannot afford the specialized repair shops that usually handle dragon modifications. I was told perhaps a regular human mechanic might be able to help, but I understand if you cannot." Marcus had heard about this problem. After the war, many dragon veterans had stayed on Earth, but their unique physiology made it difficult to use standard human vehicles. Special modifications were required, and the companies that provided them charged enormous fees. Most dragons couldn't afford proper maintenance, leaving them struggling with transportation in a world not designed for beings their size. "Let me take a look," Marcus said simply. "Pull it around to the main bay." The dragon stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of joke. When Marcus simply waited patiently, the creature nodded slowly and made its way back outside. A few minutes later, a heavily modified pickup truck backed into the garage. The vehicle had been extensively altered with reinforced suspension and a wider cab, but the most obvious modification was the hover conversion system mounted underneath. It was a complex piece of technology that allowed the truck to float a few inches off the ground, making it possible for the dragon to drive without the vehicle collapsing under its weight. "The name's Marcus, by the way," he said as the dragon carefully extracted itself from the driver's seat. "I am called Thyrak," the dragon replied with a slight bow of its massive head. "I served with the 3rd Human Infantry Division during the siege of Kepler Station." Marcus whistled low. He'd heard stories about Kepler Station, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. The fact that Thyrak was standing here meant he'd survived something that had claimed thousands of lives, both human and dragon. "Thank you for your service," Marcus said, meaning it. Then he got down to business. "Now let's see what's wrong with this hover unit." As Marcus slid under the truck on his mechanic's creeper, he could hear Thyrak shifting nervously above him. The dragon was probably wondering if a human mechanic would have any idea how to work on alien technology. To be honest, Marcus wasn't entirely sure either, but he'd always believed that machinery was machinery, regardless of who built it. The hover conversion unit was indeed a marvel of engineering, but as Marcus examined it closely, he began to understand how it worked. The basic principles weren't that different from human anti-gravity systems, just scaled up and reinforced for the massive weight it had to support. The problem became apparent quickly. "When's the last time you had the graviton emitters cleaned?" Marcus called out from under the truck. There was a pause. What are graviton emitters?" Marcus slid out from under the vehicle and looked up at Thirak. The dragon's expression was embarrassed, and Marcus suddenly realized what was happening. Thirak probably knew how to perform basic maintenance on dragon technology, but the hybrid systems that had been jury-rigged for Earth use were completely foreign to him. "It's not your fault," Marcus said gently. "These conversion systems are basically human and dragon tech welded together. The graviton emitters are the human part, and they need regular cleaning or they start to fail. The dragon side is trying to compensate, but it's not designed for that kind of stress." Relief flooded Thirak's features. "Can it be repaired?" "Absolutely," Marcus said, already mentally cataloging what he'd need. "It'll take a few hours of work, and I'll need to order some replacement parts, but it's nothing too complicated. The real crime is that whoever installed this system didn't tell you about the maintenance requirements. The installation company said dragons didn't need to worry about upkeep," Thirak admitted. "They said our technology was superior and wouldn't have human problems." Marcus felt a flash of anger at whoever had taken advantage of Thirak's trust. Well, they were either lying or incompetent. "Give me until Monday afternoon and I'll have you running smooth again." "How much will this cost?" Thirak asked, and Marcus could hear the worry in his voice. Marcus considered the work involved and the cost of parts. It would normally be about $800, but looking at Thirak's worn clothes and the obvious age of the truck's other modifications, he suspected money was tight. $200 for parts, another $100 for labor," Marcus said. Thirak's relief was palpable. "That seems very reasonable. Most places quote me 3 times that amount." "Most places are trying to rip you off," Marcus said bluntly. "This is honest work for honest pay." As Thirak carefully maneuvered out of the garage, having accepted Marcus's offer to look at the truck over the weekend, Marcus found himself thinking about the encounter. He'd always heard that dragons were proud, fierce warriors, but Thirak had seemed almost fragile. Not physically, obviously, but there had been something vulnerable about the way he'd expected rejection, the way he'd been surprised by simple kindness. Marcus spent the weekend researching dragon-human hybrid vehicle systems online and ordering the necessary parts. It turned out that Thirak's problem was incredibly common among dragon veterans, and the solutions were well documented in military maintenance manuals that civilian mechanics rarely saw. The fact that specialized shops were charging premium prices for what amounted to routine maintenance was infuriating. Monday morning arrived with Thirak returning precisely when Marcus opened the shop. The dragon seemed nervous, as if he'd spent the weekend wondering whether Marcus would actually help him or if it had all been some elaborate joke. "Right on time," Marcus said, gesturing for Thirak to bring the truck into the bay. "I've got all the parts we need, and I found the official maintenance manual for this conversion system. Turns out there's a whole checklist of things that should be done every 6 months." As Marcus worked, Thirak watched carefully, asking occasional questions about what was being done and why. It became clear that the dragon was trying to learn, wanting to understand his vehicle well enough to handle basic maintenance himself in the future. "You're a fast learner," Marcus commented as Thirak correctly identified a worn connection before Marcus had pointed it out. "Dragon memory is quite good," Thirak replied. "We don't forget things easily. It served me well in learning human ways, though sometimes I wish I could forget certain battle memories." There was pain in that statement, the kind of deep hurt that Marcus recognized. His own father had been a veteran, and Marcus had grown up understanding that some experiences left permanent marks on a person's soul. My dad always said the best way to honor hard memories was to use them to help others, Marcus offered quietly. Maybe that's why you noticed I was doing this maintenance wrong before I caught it. Your experience watching out for problems. Thyrak was quiet for a long moment. Your father sounds like a wise human. He was, Marcus agreed. Lost him 5 years ago, but I still hear his voice when I'm working on something tricky. When the work was finished, Thyrak's truck hovered smoothly and quietly. The dragon ran through several test maneuvers in the garage, his face lighting up with something approaching joy as the vehicle responded perfectly to his controls. It hasn't run this well since I first had it converted, Thyrak said, genuine happiness in his voice. Thank you, Marcus. This kindness will not be forgotten. As Thyrak paid the agreed-upon fee and prepared to leave, Marcus handed him a printed copy of the maintenance manual and a small toolkit with the specialized wrenches needed for the graviton emitters. No charge for those, Marcus said when Thyrak started to protest. Consider it an investment in keeping you safely on the road. The dragon stared at the tools and manual for a long moment, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that seemed to contain entire volumes of unspoken gratitude. In dragon culture, Thyrak said slowly, we have a concept called Kethvar. It means a debt of kindness that extends beyond the person who showed it. When someone helps you without expecting anything in return, you become responsible for passing that kindness forward to others. Sounds like a good way to live, Marcus replied. Yes, Thyrak agreed. It is. As the dragon's truck disappeared into the evening traffic, Marcus returned to his regular work, thinking about their conversation. He'd simply done what seemed right, treating Thyrak like any other customer who needed help. It hadn't occurred to him that such basic decency would mean so much to someone. What Marcus didn't know was that Thyrak's gratitude extended far beyond human understanding, and that dragons had ways of honoring debts that humans had never imagined. The universe, it seemed, had been paying attention to the kindness shown in a small auto repair shop, and cosmic forces were already beginning to shift in response to one mechanic's simple decision to treat everyone with equal respect. 6 months passed before Marcus saw Thyrak again, but when the dragon returned to Riley's auto repair, he wasn't alone. 3 other dragons accompanied him, each piloting their own modified vehicles that clearly needed attention. Word had spread through the local dragon veteran community about a human mechanic who treated them fairly and actually knew how to work on their hybrid systems. Marcus, Thyrak greeted him warmly, as the group pulled into the expanded bay that Marcus had converted specifically for dragon-sized customers. I hope you don't mind that I brought friends. The more the merrier, Marcus replied, though internally he was calculating whether he had enough parts in stock to handle multiple repairs. The dragon maintenance supplies weren't exactly easy to find through normal channels. Thyrak introduced his companions, Zelthara, a sleek blue dragon who had served as a reconnaissance specialist, Gorvak, a massive red dragon whose scarred hide spoke of frontline combat, and Nimara, a smaller green dragon whose damaged wings suggested she'd been grounded permanently. Each had their own story of struggle with post-war life on Earth, and each had transportation problems that conventional mechanics had either couldn't or wouldn't address. What struck Marcus most was how different this group dynamic was from Thyrak's first solo visit. Where Thyrak had been hesitant and expecting rejection, this group carried themselves with quiet confidence. They trusted that they would be treated fairly here, and that trust transformed their entire demeanor. Thyrak has told us much about your skill and character, Nimara said, her voice softer than the others but carrying clear authority. He says you charge honest prices and teach rather than simply repair. I believe in educating my customers, Marcus confirmed. Understanding your vehicle makes you a better driver, and helps you catch problems early. As Marcus began examining the various vehicles, he noticed patterns in the problems they were experiencing. Most issues stemmed from the same root cause: incompatible maintenance schedules between human and dragon technologies, complicated by the fact that part suppliers were charging premium prices for anything labeled as dragon-compatible. "You know," Marcus said during a lunch break, sharing sandwiches with the group in his office, "I've been thinking about this supply chain problem you're all dealing with. Most of these parts you need are just standard human components with minor modifications. There's no reason they should cost 5 times the normal price." "The companies know we have few alternatives," Gorvac rumbled, his massive frame somehow fitting into Marcus's reinforced chair. "They charge what they believe we will pay because we must pay." "What if we change that equation?" Marcus asked. "I've been researching suppliers, and I think I could source parts directly from manufacturers and do the modifications myself. Cut out the middlemen who are inflating prices." The dragons exchanged glances, communicating in their own language for a moment before Thyrax spoke up. "That would be significant," he said carefully. "But it would also require considerable investment of time and money on your part. Why would you take such a risk for dragon customers?" Marcus considered his answer. The honest truth was that he'd grown to genuinely care about the dragon situation. They were veterans who had fought alongside humans, sacrificing their own bodies and often their own people's approval to help Earth survive an existential threat. The idea that they were now being exploited by greedy businesses made his blood boil. "Because it's the right thing to do," Marcus said simply. "And because I think there's a sustainable business model here if we do it right." Over the following weeks, Marcus began implementing his plan. He reached out to parts manufacturers directly, explaining the situation and negotiating for bulk supplies of the components most commonly needed for dragon vehicle maintenance. He converted part of his garage into a parts modification workshop, teaching himself the specialized techniques needed to adapt human technology for dragon use. The response from the manufacturer was surprising. Several companies, once they understood what Marcus was trying to accomplish, offered significant discounts and technical support. It turned out that many of the engineers who had worked on the original human-dragon hybrid systems during the war were frustrated by how their technology was being exploited in civilian markets. "We designed those systems to be maintained easily and cheaply," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a lead engineer at Graviton Dynamics, during a video conference with Marcus. "The fact that companies are charging premium prices for routine maintenance was never our intention. We'd be happy to support your venture." Word of Marcus's expanding services spread rapidly through the dragon community. Within months, he was receiving visits from dragons who traveled hundreds of miles to reach his shop. Each one brought stories of overcharging, dismissive treatment, and outright discrimination from other service providers. More importantly, they brought something else: knowledge. Dragons, it turned out, had maintenance and repair techniques that humans had never considered. Their understanding of energy systems and metallurgy, developed over millennia of crafting their own tools and weapons, could be applied to hybrid technologies in ways that made them more efficient and durable. "Human engineering tends to overcomplicate simple problems," Zelthara explained while showing Marcus how to optimize the energy flow in a hover conversion unit. "Dragon approach is to understand the fundamental forces and work with them rather than against them." The technique she demonstrated improved the unit's efficiency by nearly 15% while reducing maintenance requirements significantly. When Marcus suggested they should document these improvements and share them with other mechanics, the dragons were enthusiastic about the idea. "Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied," Nimara said, a common dragon saying that Marcus was beginning to appreciate deeply. The collaboration evolved into something none of them had initially planned. Marcus's garage became an informal research center where human mechanical knowledge merged with dragon engineering principles. They developed new maintenance protocols, improved existing systems, and created comprehensive guides that could help any mechanic work on dragon-human hybrid technologies. But the most significant change was in the relationships being formed. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the time spent with his dragon customers, learning about their culture, their history, and their perspectives on human society. The dragons, in turn, began to trust not just Marcus, but the idea that humans could be reliable partners rather than merely temporary allies. "You know," Thyrak said one evening as they finished upgrading his truck's suspension system, "when I first came to Earth after the war, I expected to be tolerated at best. Most dragons did. We thought humans would see us as useful during the crisis, but unwanted afterward." "Some humans probably do feel that way," Marcus admitted honestly. "But I think more people would surprise you if they got the chance to know dragons as individuals, rather than just as war stories." "Perhaps," Thyrak agreed. "But it takes someone willing to take that first step, to see past the differences and treat others with simple dignity. That someone was you, Marcus." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing. The caller was Dr. Chen from Graviton Dynamics, and her tone was excited. "Marcus, I've been reviewing the technical reports you've been sending us about your dragon-human collaborative improvements," she said. "My company's board of directors wants to meet with you. They're interested in potentially licensing some of these innovations and scaling them for broader distribution." After hanging up, Marcus looked around his garage, which had transformed from a simple auto repair shop into something resembling a small research facility. Dragon-sized workstations stood alongside human equipment. Technical manuals in both languages were scattered across workbenches, and the walls were covered with improvement schematics developed through the collaboration. "That was interesting news," he told the dragons, explaining the call. "Interesting indeed," Gorvak rumbled, "but also perhaps dangerous. Human corporations have not always dealt fairly with dragon knowledge. Which is why," Thyrak said thoughtfully, "we should ensure that any agreements protect dragon interests as well as human ones. Perhaps it's time to formalize our collaboration." Nimara nodded agreement. In dragon culture, when individuals from different clans work together successfully, they sometimes form a new clan that combines their strengths. Perhaps humans and dragons need something similar. The suggestion sparked a long discussion about how such a partnership might work. Dragons operated on principles of honor and long-term thinking that differed significantly from typical human business practices. But Marcus had been learning to appreciate the dragon approach, which emphasized sustainable relationships over short-term profit. "What if we created a cooperative?" Marcus suggested. "Shared ownership, shared profits, shared decision-making. Everyone contributes according to their abilities and benefits according to their contributions." The dragons were intrigued by the concept, though they needed time to discuss it among themselves in their own language. Dragon decision-making processes were more deliberate than human ones, involving careful consideration of long-term consequences and community impact. While they deliberated, Marcus found himself thinking about how much his life had changed since that first evening when Thyrak had walked into his shop. What had started as a simple repair job had evolved into something much larger, a bridge between two species that were still learning how to coexist peacefully. The phone rang again, this time with a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Admiral Jennifer Hayes, Director of the Department of Interspecies Affairs, the government agency responsible for managing human-alien relations. "Mr. Riley," she said formally, "we need to talk. Your work with the Dragon veteran community has attracted attention at very high levels, and there are some people who would like to discuss expanding your efforts significantly." As Marcus scheduled a meeting with the Admiral, he realized that his simple act of kindness toward Thyrak had started something much larger than anyone had anticipated. The universe, it seemed, was still taking notes, and the consequences of treating everyone with dignity were about to become clear on a scale that Marcus could never have imagined. Admiral Hayes arrived at Marcus's garage exactly on time, accompanied by 2 aides and a dragon that Marcus didn't recognize. The dragon was enormous even by dragon standards, with silver scales that seemed to shimmer in the fluorescent lights, and bearing ceremonial markings that spoke of high rank. "Mr. Riley," Admiral Hayes began after introductions, "I'd like you to meet Dragon Admiral Zeth Kalar, liaison between the Dragon Collective and Earth's government. We understand you've been doing remarkable work with the veteran community." Zeth Kalar's voice carried the weight of authority when he spoke. But Marcus noticed the same careful respect that all the dragons showed when visiting his shop. "Human Marcus Riley," the dragon said formally, "your reputation precedes you. The Dragon Collective has been monitoring the reports from our veterans about your establishment. What you have accomplished here is unprecedented." "I just fix vehicles," Marcus replied, though he was beginning to understand that something much larger was happening. Admiral Hayes smiled. "Mr. Riley, in the 6 months since you began working with the Dragon veteran community, there have been measurable improvements in human-dragon relations across 17 major cities. Veterans who were isolated and struggling are now participating in community activities. Dragon-owned businesses are reporting increased human customers. Interspecies collaboration in other fields has increased by 40%. Zeth Kalar added, "More significantly, the Dragon Collective has received formal requests from 3 other species asking about establishing similar relationships with humanity. The Thyrolian Trade Union, the Keth Confederacy, and the Zephyrian Assembly have all expressed interest in what they term the Earth model of post-war integration." Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, trying to process what he was being told. "You're saying that fixing some hover cars has somehow affected interstellar diplomacy?" "Kindness has consequences," Thyrak said from the garage entrance, where he had appeared with Nimara and Zelthara. "In dragon philosophy, we believe that small acts of genuine compassion create ripples that expand far beyond their original scope. You proved that humans and dragons could be true partners, not just temporary allies." Admiral Hayes nodded. "Which brings us to why we're here. The President has authorized a new initiative, the Interspecies Cooperation Program. We want you to head the Civilian Integration Division." The proposal was staggering. Marcus would oversee the creation of human-alien collaborative workshops across the globe, training mechanics, engineers, and technicians to work with technology from multiple species. The goal was to establish sustainable economic relationships that went beyond simple trade agreements. The funding would be substantial, Admiral Hayes explained. Enough to establish training facilities in every major city, provide equipment and supplies, and pay competitive salaries to both human and alien instructors. You'd be essentially creating a new profession, interspecies technical integration. Marcus looked around his garage, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd simply been a mechanic trying to make an honest living. Now, he was being offered the opportunity to reshape how humans and aliens work together. "There's something you should know," Zeth Kalar said solemnly. "The Dragon Collective has been debating whether to share our advanced technologies with other species for over 50 years. We have manufacturing techniques, energy systems, and materials science that could revolutionize civilization. But we feared that the knowledge would be misused by those who see technology as a tool for domination rather than cooperation." Nimara stepped forward. "Your actions have convinced the collective that some humans can be trusted with such knowledge. The Dragon Elders are prepared to share technologies that we have never revealed before, but only through partnerships, like what you have created here." The implications were enormous. Dragon technology was centuries ahead of human development in many areas. Medical systems that could heal injuries previously considered permanent, energy sources that could end humanity's environmental problems, transportation systems that could make interstellar travel accessible to ordinary people. "But why me?" Marcus asked. "I'm just a mechanic. Surely there are diplomats, scientists, people with more experience in this kind of thing." Thyrak answered, "Because you treated me with dignity when you had no reason to do so. Because you chose to help rather than exploit. Because when you saw problems, you found solutions that benefited everyone rather than just yourself. These are the qualities needed for what you would be attempting." Admiral Hayes added, "We've reviewed your approach carefully, Mr. Riley. You've proven that sustainable relationships can be built through mutual respect and shared benefit. That's exactly the foundation needed for successful interspecies cooperation." Marcus spent the next week in intensive discussions with government officials, dragon leaders, and representatives from the other alien species interested in the program. The scope of what was being proposed was breathtaking, but so were the potential benefits for all involved. The three species that had expressed interest each brought unique capabilities. The Thyrolians were master traders with an unparalleled understanding of logistics and distribution. The Keth were craftspeople whose artistic and engineering abilities complemented dragon and human technologies perfectly. The Zephyrians were explorers with advanced communication and navigation systems that could revolutionize space travel. "Each species has struggled with post-war integration," explained Ambassador Thys, the Thyrolian representative. The Dragon veteran success story suggests that cooperative rather than competitive relationships might be the answer to problems we all face. The program that emerged from these negotiations was ambitious beyond anything Marcus had imagined. Training centers would be established in major cities worldwide, each one staffed with instructors from multiple species. Human technicians would learn to work with alien technologies, while alien residents would be taught human systems and methods. More importantly, the centers would serve as community hubs where different species could interact naturally, building the personal relationships that seemed to be the foundation of successful cooperation. The Dragon veterans' experience had shown that formal diplomatic agreements meant little without genuine understanding between individuals. "We're not just teaching people to fix machines," Marcus realized during one planning session. "We're teaching them to work together as partners." "Exactly," agreed Dr. Chen, who had been recruited to help design the technical curriculum. "The maintenance protocols you developed with the Dragons prove that different approaches to problem solving can be combined for better results than either could achieve alone." The first prototype center opened 6 months later in Marcus's hometown, built around his expanded garage as the core facility. Representatives from all 5 species worked together to create a space that accommodated everyone's needs while fostering natural interaction. The opening ceremony was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Dragons flew overhead in precise formations, while Thyrolian trade ships landed with cargo containers full of supplies. Keth artisans demonstrated their crafting techniques alongside human machinists, and Zephyrian explorers shared navigation technologies with human pilots. "1 year ago," Thyrak said during his speech at the ceremony, "I was a broken veteran struggling to maintain a single vehicle. Today, I am an instructor helping to train the first generation of true interspecies technicians. This transformation happened because one human chose kindness over indifference. The success of the program exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 2 years, similar centers had opened in over 50 cities worldwide. Unemployment among alien veterans dropped to nearly zero, while human participants reported unprecedented job satisfaction and opportunities for advancement. More significantly, the collaborative technologies emerging from these centers began solving problems that no single species had been able to address alone. Energy systems that combined human engineering with dragon power sources and Thyrolian efficiency protocols. Transportation networks that merged Zephyrian navigation with Keth artistic design and human manufacturing capabilities. Marcus found himself traveling constantly, consulting on new center designs and troubleshooting integration problems. But he always returned to his original garage, which had become something of a shrine to the power of simple kindness. "Do you ever regret that first decision?" Nimara asked him one evening, as they worked together on a new prototype vehicle that incorporated design elements from all 5 species. Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had become far more complicated, filled with responsibilities he'd never asked for and attention he'd never wanted. But then he looked around at the garage where dragons worked alongside humans, where beings from 5 different worlds shared knowledge and friendship, where the universe itself seemed to have shifted toward cooperation rather than conflict. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it at all." Outside, the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors as ships from multiple species moved through the evening air, their crews trained in centers based on the model Marcus had accidentally created by simply treating everyone with dignity. The universe had indeed been paying attention to that first act of kindness, and its response had transformed not just Marcus's life, but the relationships between civilizations across the galaxy. In dragon philosophy, they had a saying, "Kindness planted becomes wisdom harvested." Marcus had planted a simple seed of compassion, and the universe had grown it into something magnificent beyond imagination. The ripples of that first moment of decency continued to spread, touching lives and worlds in ways that would be felt for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest changes in the universe begin not with grand declarations or mighty battles, but with a human mechanic deciding to treat a dragon veteran with the same respect he would show any customer. The universe, as it turned out, had been waiting for exactly that kind of simple, powerful choice.